As you know, the financial forecasting model that we use has two major calculators in there that do a lot of the number crunching for us. On the revenue side, 71% of the revenue projection is calculated out through the tax calculation model. And then on the expenditure side, 74% is calculated out related with salaries and benefits, change in staffing, and etc. This is a graphical representation. As you know, the fiscal year 2019 budget is the basis. Even though we have 5 years of history, the budget, current budget is the building block, and you see there 71% of our revenue comes from local taxes. Evidence-based funding now is 9%. The reason why is because that's a combination, as you know, 5 old items. It used to be the old general state aid and special ed personnel and some other minor ones. Now the remaining other 2%, that's the remaining of our old categorical, so transportation aid, a few of those. This is a graphic of the 2019 budget for expenditures. As you can see here, 74% related to salaries and benefits. And I apologize for not saying this at the beginning. This entire presentation is based solely on our operating funds for tonight's presentation. So just so you know that. Okay, so the base model. What's really changed since the last time we met? Well, first one, we've updated, and I show you the updated CPI. We've updated the growth, property growth, based on what the county, Will County, has gave us our estimated on that. We've also adjusted the change. You know, when we actually adopted the fiscal year 19 budget, we moved $600,000 from Fund 20 to Fund 60 in 19. So now we'll have made that adjustment in there also. Finally, we've readjusted or reestimated all of our salaries and benefits moving forward. And in your packets tonight, there'd be a very detailed sheet that I've prepared since we had a lot of different changes. This is all the assumptions in the model moving forward. And that's at your tables there for your review. So let's take a look at the CPI. As you know, the CPI, or the change in the CPI, drives 72% of the district's revenue. On the screen here is the last 6 years of the CPI, which is the green bars, and then we have the blue bars for the future. For 19 and 2021, those are based on the Wall Street Journal. We've determined, well, I've determined, I don't know about the board determined, but I've determined it's a good estimator, and we use it in the model. And then finally, 22 and 23 is just based on the current 17 and 18. New growth. Well, as I mentioned, Will County has given us our early estimates. 55.1 million is our early estimate for new growth, and that's typically pretty darn on. So as they'll finish crunching that out, but we should be pretty darn close. That's going to generate about $1 million of additional tax revenue for the district. And then, as you know, we are just projecting 50 million on a flat basis going out. So summarize it all up, and what do we have? Well, as you know, the district has a fund balance 420, which says we will achieve at least a 3% surplus moving forward in each fiscal year. You can see here, there we are, we're short. Why are we short? Well, this is mainly to do with the change in our fiscal year 19 budget. We're using 600,000 or leaving 600,000 in Fund 20 or Fund 60, and that was going to be used in 20. Now we've moved that, so now and that's a non-operating. So we made that shift between operating and non-operating. It does free up unrestricted dollars. We're now Fund 60 is restricted, but that being said, it's going to leave a little gap here because now we've shifted 3.6 million all into Fund 19 or Fund 20 in fiscal year 20 for those expenditures. You'll notice right here that's higher than we had initially when we were talking 2 months ago. That number right there is higher because we're having a bigger surplus in 19. So anyway, we would possibly need to make a reduction in fiscal year 2020 of $718,000 to meet the board goal. However, this will not be determined until next spring as we know more about the fiscal year 19 operations and where we're ending. As you remember, and you saw in the audit, we were about $800,000 under in expenditures for our last budget. So we'll wait and see how that goes. Here is a graphic of fund balance.
That's a question. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Kind of just a statement again. I think what we have here is, waiting until later is fine, but really what we're probably going to end up cutting is from the capital projects, I would assume, or that would be one option.
That certainly supplies, capital projects, yes, it would all be one of those options.
And those have to be decided on sooner than that time period.
Well, tonight, part of the process is we want to talk with the board about giving the pre-approval to head forward with the engineering. None of those projects would actually be finalized until in the spring when the board actually receives the bids and votes on the item. Worst case scenario, if something had to be postponed that was an item we felt very strongly could be postponed, the engineering would still be able to be reused when we go, bring it off the shelf, if you will, and have the funding to move it forward. But yes, that's a good point. That's why we're here tonight, to talk about this. Anything else on? Okay. All right. So if you look at the fund balance 420 policy on a cumulative basis, really we're talking about 3% surplus annually. What that equates to is accumulated surplus. And as you can see here, based on these assumptions, we're anticipating having $17.9 million added to our fund balance over the next 6 years. Bringing us overall, even if we were a little shy here, bringing us overall to above policy 420 in the long run. Now let's just break that down by the percentages. So here's the goals, and as you know, what we've done is as each time, if we beat that goal, then we up it. So right now where we're at is we're looking at our goals, you can read them. Here's where we're projecting to be. We're projecting to be at 29.66. And if we were going to stick strict with the policy, of course we're shy here, where it's already talking about needing to cut 0.778% of the budget, or $718,000. So it's a large amount as the dollars, but as percentage, it's not that great as an overall budget.
And we're looking at percent of fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't those be going up 3% per year? And
well, these are estimated actuals. These are going up 3%. Is that not 3?
Yeah, but from fiscal year 2019 to 2020, you're going up.
Let's see there.
I'm looking at the percent of fund balance.
You're looking here.
Yeah.
These are actual based on that model. So you see the problem is right there. So what I'm looking at here is actual projected. So you can see we're shy here, but here, if we did nothing, we'd be caught back up. But as you know, what we've kind of said is, hey, look, each year is going to stand on its own 2 feet, and we're going to make 3% each year. I'm just showing you what the model's spitting out. Okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so now let's look at our worst case scenario. As you know, this is a good exercise for us to walk through. So, worst case scenario, we'll have no changes in expenditures. We're going to just assume what we would need to do. This model is to show us what we would need to do in order to meet policy 420. Revenue, we have a change in the CPI. We have a change in new growth, Evidence-based funding prorated at 93%, and then other revenue stays flat. And I'll apologize for that. This looked great when I was pulling it off the web. I'll probably be ditching this one because it's way too dark. We do not put into this model a pension cost shift because we are going to model property tax freeze, and I just don't see it happening at both. And as mentioned last month, or last time we met, the evidence-based funding in the model, not in the budget, but in the model, has been updated to our new allocation of $7,904,000, and then that's prorated off of that. Okay, so what's the CPI look like then in worst case? Well, as we already talked about, we have a property tax freeze. Most likely the quickest the legislation could get in, because 2018, we've already set our levy, and people are in the process of setting that right now. So they could get it in there for 19, so we got 2 property tax freezes, 19 and 20, and then we got just 1% moving all 3 years out. So pretty conservative. Then on new growth. So on new growth, what we're looking at here is we're looking at economic slowdown. Now the way it works is the property that's taxed in 2019, we tax 1 year's in arrear in this state. So that means that's property that's already being constructed right now in 2018. Well, we know housing, I got contractors coming in my office and, things are moving. So we don't see that happening. But if there was an economic slowdown then in 19, that would then affect us in 20. So we project that in 20, we may possibly have, the district could experience the lowest new growth that they've had in the last 13 years. So it seems pretty conservative. Now, crank in those assumptions, and it doesn't look great. So as you know, right there's our 3% achieved line, and as you can see, we're well below that in all years. What's that do to our cumulative fund balance if we did nothing? Well, doesn't look great either. As you can imagine, we would then be deficit spending, we would be headed in the wrong direction than what we heard from our auditors tonight. What would it take to rectify that? Well, first thing is in 2020 would be where we need to take the biggest chunk. So now that jumps to just over $2 million, or 2.28% of the budget would need to be reused, and then about 1% to 0.5% as we go. Now, we assume we'd be making sustained reductions, meaning not just one-timers, things that would be carried forward. So those numbers are cumulative numbers. And so at the end of it, we would need to be cut overall 4.8 million of cumulative sustainable cuts. As you mentioned earlier, Mr. Lucetti, in the first, we would need to look at things that are non-contractual. So we need to look at like capital expenditures, non-salary benefit appropriations. So supplies, non-cap, materials, those kind of things. Then of course, because 74% of our budget is personnel, we would have to be then working through and negotiate reductions in salaries and benefits or change in staffing level, but it would ultimately have to affect our salaries and benefits. That's the only way it becomes sustainable. So with that, any questions on the updated 5-cast at this moment? Okay, with that, what the next thing we'd like to have do is we have Rich here with the architect, who wants to walk through the current plan.
Good evening, everybody. I didn't realize I was going to follow that doom and gloom type of scenario, but here we go with the 2020 capital improvement projects. Basically, what we're looking to do, and I'm just going in order that you guys have it on your spreadsheet, so there's no particular order for this. At Central, we have some outbuilding renovations, but then we'd like to do the bathrooms are kind of run down, the concession stand is similar at the Central visitors concession stand.
So I want to make sure I understand. So outbuildings, describe for me those again, because that was the first question I had. What is an outbuilding?
A building on our property that's not connected to the school.
So, but that's a concession stand.
We're talking about the concession stand at Central Stadium right now. And then, on the next slide, we're proposing to do some replacement and restoration work on the pavement at Central. This was part of the plan that the board approved back in November of 2016. There's some full depth replacement and some mill and overlay work that we are proposing. We don't have the money in this plan right now for a full redesign of the front of Central, but we will do a traffic study if this is approved. What is a traffic study? We would have an engineer come out, speak with the staff at the school, and then observe drop-off and observe pickup, and just spend some time here, observe what's going on, and make recommendations for changes to make the traffic patterns safer and smoother.
Is that how we got that, like, sidewalk at East?
Yes.
But that's not built into this.
It's not. The traffic study is built into the professional services portion, but major design changes are not built in.
What if the engineer recommended, for safety purposes, making those changes? We'd have to figure out a way to get those done then, right? If an engineer comes out and says this is completely wrong, and you gotta change it, we'd have to figure that out then, right?
We would have some decisions to make, sure.
So go back, Rich, go back one. So any of the issues would likely be the front section. So if that were the case, where recommendation would be a complete re-engineering, that would be something that we would have to consider when looking at the project in its entirety.
I mean, I could also see the schoolhouse portion and all those entrances, I mean, reducing those
Right.
would be something, because you have people coming in all sorts of angles.
Right.
I think it was pylons, but they're temporary, and people go in between them, and it's,
If we saw some, or it was recommended to us that there would need to be a major change, could we then, for instance, look at the schoolhouse portion and say, oh, we're not gonna do that this year, and then
Yes.
just move those resources over to the front?
Yes,
That's-
this would happen during the design phase,
Okay.
prior to bidding.
But the traffic study is part of this process, right?
Yes. These are just basic pictures showing some of the conditions out there on the lots, the reasons why the pavement itself needs to be either restored or replaced. The outdoor tracks, we're asking to do what they call a structural recoat. We want to extend the life of the life of the tracks. Some of them are cracking. Once they start cracking and water gets underneath, freeze thaw, they'll deteriorate quickly.
That's a function of just living in Illinois. Like water gets in, it freezes, it cracks, it, every year that happens.
Central needs to replace the door hardware. I'm sorry. Replace the door hardware and update the key schedule. Basically, a lot of the locks at Central East are old. Some of them are still knobs rather than levers. We want to move to a master key schedule at both Central and East, and a security lock function at Central. Master key schedule allows access throughout the building with a single key, and the classroom security function would allow teachers to lock their classroom from the inside in the event that there was an emergency. Turf replacement at Central and East. Fields are aging, they're out of warranty, the fibers are deteriorating, the infill over time gets dirty, and also the rubber can't harden, so we're at the point where it's time to start talking about replacing them.
Those have to get certified every year?
There's no rule that says we have to get them certified every year. What we do is a test called the GMAX test. It's not the holy grail of whether your field is safe or not, but it does give you an indication of the impact resistance. Over the past couple of years, we've had to do
increasing amount of aeration and increasing amount of rubber in order to make the G-Max readings where we feel they're safe. Tennis court replacement at Central. These courts are beyond repair. So if we want to continue to have our students play tennis on these courts, we're going to have to replace them. Security camera upgrades at Central and East. Those systems are aging, they're near end of life, and they're, quite frankly, they're undersized. There are not enough cameras in the building to achieve the level of monitoring that we need. So we'd like to increase the size and upgrade those. And then finally at West, the tennis courts, we'd like to just make some repairs. There's cracks, some spalling. Color coat will extend the life. The process is called armor crack repair. You might ask why we wouldn't do this at Central and East. It's a unit price on that per linear foot, and once you get to so many linear feet of cracks, it makes it cost prohibitive to do the repairs, and it's time to replace. So basically, we are asking the board to approve the design and bidding on these projects. We would bring them back to the board for approval once we have the bids, and construction will take place over summer of 2019.
Any questions of Rich regarding the presentation? Right now, we're looking for a motion to put together a bid package and engineering for the items that are identified in the fiscal year 20 draft plan, correct?
Correct.
But no commitment to do these at this point in time.
No, just commitment to engineering and bid process, and included in the backup materials was a potential breakdown of how the bids would be broken out.
Which incorporated some of the discussion from our
Last year.
previous, where we bundled and then unbundled.
Correct.
So moved on the motion.
Oh, we have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second, additional discussion.
So I think we have to have also some prioritization, because I think, again, I made this point, but we're going to be making these decisions before, in the spring, before we even have a 2020 budget, before we even know what the state is doing. And this is kind of the first time we haven't had any money left in our capital projects fund. So, I mean, from what I heard, as long as, again, we get confirmation that if we did not move forward, the design phase is good to move forward, then that's fine. And we have the decision coming up in the spring, but I think, you know, it's important that we keep with making sure that we keep on, you know, meeting that board goal. And if something has to fall off, I think administration should come to us with kind of a plan. Or also, if something comes up in the parking lot survey that, you know, should be moved forward. And then my next question would, I guess I did have one for Rich. What happened with the roofs work that was scheduled for this year?
Well, what we've done is we've deferred the roofs for 1 year for a couple of reasons. One reason is we did some roofing, and we've got our worst of the areas caught up. We feel comfortable with where we are, but the other reason is we're doing a feasibility study on solar panels on the roof and what that would look like. Right now, ComEd has some incentives. There are some solar companies out there that are trying to sell us on a power purchase agreement where they would put solar panels on our roofs and then sell us the power from them at a reduced rate. So it's kind of in the infancy stages, but Brad and I are working on a feasibility for that.
So at some point in this process, based on Member Luchetti's recommendation, we'll look to have some form of prioritization as to the must-haves, the need-to-dos, and the wants. My basic point. Okay, very good. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, a call for a vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous, the motion
Okay,
passes.
thank you. And thank you, Brad, Rich, and everybody. That was helpful.
Thanks for driving down low.
Appreciate all your input, Lou.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
We can ask you a question if you want. Makes it worth your while.
Where'd you get your briefcase? Next on the item, Treasurer's Report for September 2018. Entertain a motion to accept the Treasurer's Report as presented in your package. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Brad?
Thank you. So tonight in your treasurer's report, we, for September 30th, 2018, the district recognized $34.5 million, just over that, and expenditures just over $8.4 million, leaving a total cash balance of $32.3 million. We have paid all of our tax anticipation warrants off at this point, and so with that, then it equals our fund balance since this is on a cash basis report. I've also went through and updated the cash flow for the September actuals, and then in your packets there, I compared that to what I had estimated. I want to bring one special note, and that is the second payment of taxes in September was actually higher than in the prior years for total taxes. But however, I discovered an error in my spreadsheet, and so actually I had projected it higher than I should have been. So it had created this variance on the cash flow basis. This is just where I'm expecting when to get what money's in. It's not on a budgetary basis. And then finally, capital expenditures, we projected that most of those, or some of those come in October, November, and we got a larger percentage in September. That's, here again, it's just cash in, cash out, flow basis, but as far as the budget goes, we will be within budget on all those items. So with that, just entertain any questions.
Is that typically what you see in the outstanding tax collections, about 3% at this time of the year?
Yeah, yes, we're getting very close to being finalized. I think last year we would have had just a little more outstanding because last year we would have had only one collection in September, whereas this year they have a second two collections in September. So our October was a little higher last year, but by after the October we'll be very close. We're getting right down just the final collections.
Brad, I know we haven't asked this question in a while, but the state is